Bill.
Yes.
Hey there,
Hi,
Eric.
Carrie. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. So good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too.
All right, friends, we're going to get going, okay?
Okay.
Aloha pa, dear friends. Welcome to the Sunday morning devotional program sponsored by the Spiritual Assemblies of the Baha'is of South DeKalb County and Sandy Springs, Georgia. It's wonderful to have all of you with us today. Across the globe, the teachings of the Baha'i faith, brought to us more than 150 years ago by His Holiness Baha'u'llah, its founder, whose name in Arabic means the glory of God, have inspired and continue to inspire individuals and communities as they strive to improve their own lives and contribute to the advancement of civilization. Baha'i beliefs address such essential themes as the oneness of God and religion, the oneness of humanity, and freedom from all forms of prejudice, the inherent nobility of the human being, the progressive revelation of religious truth, a gradual unfolding of God's purpose with the appearance of each divine teacher, the development of spiritual qualities, which allow us to reflect the image God made us in, the integration of worship and service, with work performed in the spirit of service being accounted as worship in the eyes of God, the fundamental equality of the sexes, more widely evidenced in a setting of equal opportunity, the harmony between religion and science as an established fact, the centrality of justice in all human endeavor, the importance of education, particularly for children, and the dynamics of the relationships that bind together individuals, communities, and institutions as humanity advances toward its collective maturity. Again, welcome. We're pleased to have you all join us. We'll begin with opening devotions. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking, and silence your electronic devices if you are speaking. Thank you. Kathy?
O my God, I beseech thee by the evidences of thy favor, to let me draw nigh to the sublime heights of thy holy presence, and protect me from inclining myself toward the subtle illusions of aught else but thee. Guide my steps, O my God, unto that which is acceptable and pleasing to thee. Shield me through thy might from the fury of thy wrath and chastisement, and hold me back from entering habitations not desired by thee. The Bab.
Jennifer?
Praised and glorified art thou, O God. Grant that the day of attaining thy holy presence may be fast approaching. Cheer our hearts through the potency of thy love and good pleasure, and bestow upon us steadfastness, that we may willingly submit to the will and thy decree. Verily, thy knowledge embraceth all the things thou hast created or wilt create, and thy celestial might transcendeth whatsoever thou hast called or wilt call into being. There is none to be worshipped but thee. There is none to be desired except thee. There is none to be adored besides thee, and there is naught to be loved save thy good pleasure. Verily, thou art the supreme ruler, the sovereign truth, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. Bab.
Beth?
Thou whose tests are a healing medicine to such as are nigh unto thee, whose sword is the ardent desire of all them that love thee, whose dart is the dearest wish of those hearts that yearn after thee, whose decree is the sole hope of them that have recognized thy truth. I implore thee by thy divine sweetness and by the splendors of the glory of thy face, to send down upon us from thy retreats on high that which will enable us to draw nigh unto thee. Set then our feet firm, O my God, in thy cause, and enlighten our hearts with the effulgence of thy knowledge, and illumine our breasts with the brightness of thy names. Baha'u'llah.
Jonathan?
Suffer me not, O God, my God, to be kept back from the heaven of thy bounties and the day star of thy favors. I beseech thee by that word through which thou hast subdued all things, visible and invisible, to assist me and to assist thy chosen ones, to accomplish that which shall exalt thy cause amidst thy servants and throughout thy regions. Do thou ordain for me, then, every good thing which thou hast sent down in thy book. Verily, thou art the Almighty, the ever forgiving, the most generous.
Deng Ting?
O Lord my God, assist thy loved ones to be firm in thy faith, to work in thy ways, to be steadfast in thy cause. Give them thy grace to withstand the onslaught of the self and passion, to follow the light of the divine guidance. Thou art the powerful, the gracious, the self-subsisting, the bestower, the compassionate, the almighty, the all-bountiful. Abdul Baha.
Carrie?
The purpose of religion, as revealed from the heaven of God's holy will, is to establish unity and concord amongst the peoples of the world. Make it not the cause of dissension and strife. The religion of God and his divine law are the most potent instruments and the surest of all means for the dawning of the light of unity amongst men. The progress of the world, the development of nations, the tranquility of peoples, and the peace of all who dwell on earth are among the principles and ordinances of God. Baha'u'llah.
O ye people of the peoples of the world, know assuredly that my commandments are the lamps of my loving providence among my servants, and the keys of my mercy for my creatures. Thus hath it been sent down from the heaven of the will of your Lord, the Lord of revelation. Were any man to hasten toward the sweetness of the words which the lips of the All-Merciful have willed to utter, he would, though the treasures of the earth be in his possession, renounce them one and all, that he might vindicate the truth of even one of his commandments, shining by the dayspring of his bountiful care and loving kindness. Kathy?
Surely for everything there is an all-comprehending wisdom, especially for the great and important affairs of life. The supreme and most important happening in the human world is the manifestation of God and the descent of the law of God. Abdul Baha.
Jennifer?
The primary purpose, the basic objective in laying down powerful laws and setting up great principles and institutions dealing with every aspect of civilization is human happiness and human happiness consists only in drawing closer to the threshold of Almighty God and in securing the peace and well-being of every individual member, high and low alike, of the human race. And the supreme agencies for accomplishing these two objectives are the excellent qualities with which humanity has been endowed. Abdu'l-Baha, The Secret of Divine Civilization.
Thank you to all of today's readers. Next, we're going to listen to a healing prayer. If any of you wish to remember a loved one through this prayer for healing, please feel free to call out their name at this time.
Marilyn Handis,
Walter Dickey,
Carol and her family,
Jeremy Hannah,
Heather Lawley,
Reggie Colbert,
David Sheridan,
Corteria Baxter,
Thy name is my healing, oh my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing, and my succor in both this world and the worlds to come. Thou verily art the all bountiful, the all knowing, the all wise. The all knowing, the all knowing, the all knowing, the all wise, the all knowing, the all wise, the all knowing, the all wise.
And now we're blessed to have a musical offering.
We're doing a song written in 1830 something.
1834.
Really?
No.
You know that?
Yeah.
And but made famous by Mississippi John Hurt in
46.
No,
43.
that'll do. Okay.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. Since I laid my burden down, glory, glory, hallelujah. feel better, so much better since I laid my burden down. I feel better, so much better since I laid my burden down. Glory, 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 hallelujah. Since I laid my burden down, glory, glory, hallelujah. Since I laid my burden down, since I laid my burden down, oh, since I laid my burden down, since I laid my burden down.
Friends, each week we're blessed to have a guest speaker share with us their insights on a particular topic. This week, we're honored to have with us Dr. Carrie Murphy. Dr. Murphy is a retired earth science teacher who taught for 25 years in South Carolina public schools and universities. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in middle school education from Georgia State University, an MED in community education, an IMA in earth science, and an EDD in curriculum and instruction from the University of South Carolina. She was named the 1997 South Carolina Outstanding Earth Science Teacher of the Year by the National Association of Geoscience Teachers, and the 2003 Earth Science Teacher of the Year by the Mining Association of South Carolina. Her doctoral dissertation, titled Circling the Wagons, Conceptions of Middle Adolescence Regarding Religion and Science and Implications for Critical Thinking, explored the impact of secular and fundamentalist religious education on the ability of youth to analyze and accept ideas and theories found in mainstream science, including evolution and the Big Bang. She's been a Baha'i since 1970 and has traveled extensively teaching the Baha'i faith, particularly in the Caribbean, in the American South, and on the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. She is currently writing a book on science and religion titled The Scientific Revelation, a Baha'i Perspective on Science and Religion. Friends, please welcome Dr. Carrie Murphy.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm very happy to be here, and I wanted to talk about a topic that I'm researching for this book, which is the nature of the history of science having to do with Islam and how that relates really to the Baha'i faith. From reading the guidance of Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi regarding the Islamic wonderful centuries of scientific history, the research that they did that obviously came down to all of us, there's kind of an imperative that as we think about the history of science and also the discourse that we're asked to participate in by the House of Justice, that it's important that we understand the reality of the contributions by Islam to knowledge. And of course, in our culture, there's sort of a discrepancy. There's often misinformation that's been given to the West really for hundreds and hundreds of years about Islam as a faith, but also the contributions made by it towards science. So what I wanted to do in this little talk, which I guess will be about 30, 40 minutes, and then I'd like to have some Q&A with y'all. But I wanted to sort of begin with looking at what is the guidance from Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. so that we could kind of feel their urgency in reading what they're saying. They seem to be saying that Baha'is have a job to do to help this passing of knowledge to the world, to try to correct the hundreds of years of misinformation that's been going out about Islam, and also about the scientific revolution, the golden age of science, that we are really the heirs of. It came down through Europe and India and Central Asia and all these wonderful places, that we are the beneficiaries of it. But too often it's given the title of Western science, which is fine. Western science was terrific as well. But it's, as Newton said, the scientists of our part of the world stood on the shoulders of giants from the Arabic and Islamic movement that lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years, 600-700 years, of even more, 800 years really. And they did just tremendous work. That's really a cool story also. So of course I don't have time in this short bit of space to really go into it. But what I've done is I've created a little reading list for you also. And so let's dive into a little PowerPoint that I've made, and that might make this clearer. Okay. But please feel free to ask questions even as I go. You can stop me and if there's something that I'm saying that's foggy. Now, I'm going to need your help to figure out how to get in here. Let's see. I have to get my PowerPoint on here, don't I?
Right. Get it opened up.
Okay. Do I open it up first?
It's best if you open up your PowerPoint first.
Okay, there it is.
Then
Now
come
what?
back to the Zoom screen.
Okay.
Click on the green button that says share screen.
Now,
And you should see the little icons for your different windows, and one of them will be your PowerPoint. So you click on it, and it'll be outlined in a thick blue
okay,
border.
wait a minute. This happens every time I do this. I'm not actually in the. I've clicked my Zoom. Okay, I see you, but I don't see my Zoom screen. But when I click on Zoom, I do see you. Okay.
And then can you see the green button that says share screen at the bottom of the Zoom window?
No, all I see is a little teeny box with you in it.
See if you can make it bigger. There's like
yeah, move your cursor over the Zoom window and see if some buttons on the bottom don't appear.
There's a arrow, there's a mic, there's a camera. Ah, there it is. Okay. Now I apologize.
No problem.
Okay, full screen. Okay, now I hit start. No, I hit share screen.
Right.
I'm gonna get this. Okay. Are we there?
We're there. We're seeing it now. Yes.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
and you can click F5 on your PowerPoint, and then it will just be the PowerPoint.
F5.
Or just go over to the slideshow. But
yeah, I don't mind seeing you guys too. Okay. All right. All right. All right. This is good.
That's great. I can see it.
Can you see it? Okay, good. Let's see now. Okay. Okay. The medieval Islamic empire at its height was 30% of the world's population, 60 million people. And it stretched from Spain in the west through North Africa over into the Levant, Arabia, and over into Central Asia and Persia, and really part of Turkey. So it was a huge geographic area that we're talking about here. And it's the Islamic Empire, but the people who did the work were people of really every faith. And that's part of the really great story here, is that all the world's faiths, everything from Zoroastrianism to Christianity to the Jewish faith, the Buddhist faith, everybody contributed to this great enterprise that spanned 800 years or so of really excellence. What I wanted to do was to start with the guidance from Abdu'l-Baha, so we can see what his take is on this whole topic of just the efflorescence of knowledge that happened after the coming of Muhammad. So what I'd like to do is maybe not read so much myself, but to ask one of you to read. Who would like to read this passage? How about you, Jonathan?
There you go.
Okay. Guidance from Abdu'l-Baha. In the early ages of Islam, the peoples of Europe acquired the sciences and arts of civilization from Islam as practiced by the inhabitants of Andalusia. A careful and thorough investigation of the historical record will establish the fact that the major part of the civilization of Europe is derived from Islam. For all the writings of Muslim scholars and divines and philosophers were gradually collected in Europe and were with the most painstaking care weighed and debated at academic gatherings and in centers of learning, after which their valued contents would be put to use.
Now, is there anything surprising there that anyone feels or sees in these statements?
Well, first, that so much, if not the majority of scientific knowledge in Europe came from Islam, but also in the last couple sentences where where all the Islamic writings on science were gathered by scholars, by European scholars, and compiled and put to use.
Yeah, and part of the flowering of all that work was the Renaissance. It had repercussions that we still live under. Okay. Let's see, who would like to read this? How about Joan Hampton? I saw you, Joan. Are you still there? Maybe not.
Yeah, are you addressing me, Jonathan?
No,
Okay.
Joan Hampton, is Joan Hampton there? Okay, well, it's okay, just who would like to read this? How about Jennifer?
Sure. It says the so-called Christian civilization, of which the Renaissance is one of the most striking manifestations, is essentially Muslim in its origins and foundations. It is wholly unfair to attribute the efflorescence of European culture during the Renaissance period to the influences of Christianity. It was mainly the product of the forces released by the Mohammedan dispensation.
Okay. Sandra, how about you? Would you read this?
Okay. The beginnings of European civilization date from the 7th century of the Muslim era. From 490 AH, 622 plus 490 equals 1,112.
Yeah, no, that's the actual date in our terms. Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to read all those numbers. I just wanted to make it clear that we were in the 12th century there.
Okay. Okay. Until kings, commanders, and other European leaders continually came and went between Egypt, Syria, and the West. And when in the end they all returned home, they introduced into Europe whatever they had observed over 200 and odd years in Muslim countries as to the government, social development, and learning, colleges, schools, and the refinements of living. The civilization of Europe dates from that time. Abdul Baha.
Now, what he's talking about, of course, is the Crusades, Sandra.
I'm sorry?
What he's talking about when he says those 200 years is the time that the Europeans stayed in the Middle East after the First Crusade.
Okay.
You know, how the Pope told the people of Europe to go to the Middle East and take over Jerusalem from the Muslims who had taken it because they lived there. But the Europeans stayed for 200 years in the Middle East, in places like Antioch and Jerusalem and Akka and all these different places. But they took back with them, is what he's saying, a lot of the knowledge of the culture that had developed with the science that was going on and had been going on for hundreds of years in that area. Okay. So it's not just through Spain that the knowledge of science came into Europe. It's also through Italy, through Sicily, as these crusaders came back and forth, and Normans took over Sicily and southern Italy. Then ultimately universities begin to pop up, but they were brought there from the models that were and the knowledge that was given by Islam. So the Crusades, even though it was a terrible slaughter of people, one of the effects of it was that Europe came in touch with this wonderful science and culture that was brought ultimately by Muhammad. And then
I guess one thing that jumps out to me is that as humanity, or as part of humanity, we are always standing on the shoulders of the past, whether it is Islam standing on the shoulders of Greek or Roman knowledge. It's nice to see how we lend to each other.
That's right. And that's what I find really, Sandra, the most heartening part of this whole story is that it reinforces the idea that history belongs to all of us. We're all connected. We all helped to build it, and our ancestors did. And we are the heirs to all the work that was done, all the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And the fact that these different manifestations came in history and they lit the spark of civilization is a theme that goes through a lot of the writers of history, certainly of the 20th century, people like Arnold Toynbee and George Sarton. And I have a quote by Toynbee that we'll sort of end with. Okay, so let's hear now what Shoghi Effendi has to say. Who would like to read this one? How about you, Stephen?
right? There is much misunderstanding about Islam in the West in general that you must dispel. Your task is rather difficult and requires a good deal of erudition. Your chief task is to acquaint the friends with the pure teachings of the Prophet as recorded in the Quran.
So what strikes you about that, Stephen?
Oh, well, I guess particularly what struck me is the reference to the pure teachings recorded in the Quran, because I do think it's one of the great shames that most people haven't read the Quran. And if you do read it, it is such an amazingly beautiful book that I think it would, the mere act of reading it alone would dispel a great deal of the prejudice if people would actually get around to doing it. So,
yeah. And that ties in with the sentence that strikes me. He says, your task is rather difficult and requires a good deal of erudition. But the first two words there, your task. In other words, Shoghi is giving us a task here. And hopefully we will fulfill that task. But he's telling you, I think he's telling me, look, erudition means that you've really sort of taken this on, that you're making an effort to study this. You're going to be gathering facts. You're going to go read some books or see some videos or both, or talk to people, or there's all kinds of ways to achieve it, but it is your task. Now, why would this be so important to Shoghi Effendi, that he gives us a task like this?
well, it seems to me, I mean, it's the prejudice between the Christian world and the Muslim world goes way back. And so you can't, if you're going to establish the unity of humanity, one has to overcome that prejudice. And in particular, from the Baha'i point of view, if we're going to understand progressive revelation, we have to restore Muhammad to his proper place in that process. If we were to call ourselves Baha'is and not respect Muhammad, it would be, a joke, basically.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. That's exactly right. I feel that's exactly what he's doing, what he's saying. That there won't be unity until that happens. Globally, on the big picture, this has to be fixed. There's all kinds of reasons why Europe denied the golden age of Islam for centuries, really. It had to do with power, it had to do with ignorance, but it also had to do with not wanting Islam to be true. If your manifestation you think is God, then there's not much else to say, right? But of course, we see progressive revelation as that all the different manifestations are part of one thread, one scheme that God has for educating mankind, and that they are all valid and they are all from the same source. Okay, we'll move on to the next. Now, here I just put in a few quotes from the Quran and from a couple of hadiths here. Allah grant me knowledge of the ultimate nature of things. Can they who know and they who do not know be deemed equal? Baha'u'llah also uses, I think it's Abdul Baha, I think he uses that same quote. God will exalt those of you who believe and those who have knowledge to high degrees. O my Lord, increase me in knowledge. Now let man but think from what he is created. Think about how you're created, i.e. science, i.e. evolution, biology, all of it. They do not look at the camels, how they are made, and at the sky, how it is raised high, and at the mountains, how they are fixed firm, and at the earth, how it is spread out. The hadith, whoever follows the path in the pursuit of knowledge, Allah will make a path of paradise easy for him. Okay, this is Shoghi Effendi again, finishing that thought. We've seen that there's more than 750 passages in the Quran that talk about nature, that talk about knowledge, nature, which of course the Muslims heard it. They said, okay, the hadith says that Muhammad said that even if you have to go to China, you get out there and get all the knowledge that you can. And that's exactly what the civilization did. I'll finish the sentence then. And then to point out how these teachings have, this is our task, throughout succeeding ages, influenced, nay, guided the course of human development. In other words, you have to show the position and significance of Islam in the history of civilization. That is our task. Isn't that lovely? It's so clear. And it's so, to me, both Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi are sort of very firm about this. This is really adamant. They're saying this change in the consciousness of people is in part the job of Baha'is to help with, if we're going to move forward as a global world.
Carrie.
Yeah.
I think what kind of stood out to me is that it's like understanding that we are educated in cycles, and we learn to appreciate, with the exposure
Mm-hmm.
Of this knowledge, that there's something for us at each stage or cycle. And just like we educate, a family or community, we need to do that for, the world.
Mm-hmm.
Education is just critical.
Yeah. And as I was saying earlier, the neat part to me is that the whole world made Islamic Golden Age, what we call the Islamic Empire, which is made up of lots of different faiths, lots of different people, but they all work together in just really neat ways. When you start to read the history of it, it's fascinating what they all did.
Mm-hmm.
So even from the ground up, it was a global enterprise that made this happen.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to, I made it sort of a little timeline here. And a lot of things happen in Islam, and there's a lot of words here, and I'm just hoping it's not, overwhelming, but it sort of is, but that's okay. But what I wanted to do is just give you the context of a little bit of a timeline. And this is not a very good timeline. Obviously, there's a lot left out, but I just wanted us to kind of go through it just a little bit. Muhammad died in 632 of the Common Era. And the first four caliphs were considered in the Rashidun Caliphate, 632 to 661. As you know, the uncle of Muhammad became the first caliph. He sort of took over. It was a dynastic and centralized Islamic political state. Damascus, I went down to Umayyad, is non-dynastic. It was just, they were trying to figure it out. They were beginning. It was factional. People didn't get along, but they spread Islam to the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, Byzantine and Persia, parts of Persia, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Then the Umayyad dynasty, 661 to 750, this was dynastic. The sons of the caliph became the caliph, and centralized Islamic political state emerged, and the headquarters was Damascus. The capital of Islam was there. In Arabic, the official language, the first book written in Arabic was the Quran. that the coming of Muhammad created the codification of this language in written form. So and of course that became very important. That became really an international language of the day. The Abbasid dynasty then followed. They came in rather brutishly and swiftly, really, but it turned out to be, this was the engine of the golden age of Islam, the Abbasid dynasty. 750 to 1258, the golden age of science, technology, and art. And they instituted the translation movement, that they wanted all the knowledge they could get. And they sent people out to get documents from the Byzantine Empire, from everywhere, India, just everywhere. And thousands of documents then were translated into Arabic. But the Christians did the translation, the Jews did it, the scholars did it, and it became a huge movement. For 200 years, they worked on this translation movement. The Abbasid dynasty was inclusive and cosmopolitan, largely Persian-led culture. And then ultimately, after these many years, in 1258, the Mongols destroyed the dynasty with the attack on Baghdad in 1258. 800,000 to 1 million people were killed in 1 week. They leveled Baghdad and everything changed. The House of Wisdom that had been established by the caliphs of this dynasty was destroyed. Thousands and thousands of documents were burned and destroyed. They said that the Tigris River ran black with ink from all the destroyed documents. And then there were other dynasties, the Fatimids in Egypt, the Buyids, the Seljuks, and then ultimately the Ottoman Empire takes over in 1299. Look at the length of that, 700 years, almost 800 years of Ottoman Empire. So that might be worth studying as well, because the Ottoman Empire was the one that Baha'u'llah lived in. And then what was going on in Spain was Muslims from the Middle East and Berbers and others from North Africa advanced into Spain in 711. And in 1000, a culturally rich Cordova is the largest city in the world. And what happened, one of the Umayyad relatives of the caliph was able to get away when the Abbasids came to murder them all. And he went to Spain, and he ultimately becomes caliph. And then after many hundreds of years of just doing wonderful things, and once again, the golden age is there too. And then from Spain, that knowledge is then, there's a second, in a sense, translation movement where because by this time people can figure out, boy, this Islamic civilization's really got something to say. They want it translated into Latin. So that was the second translation movement done by Europe, really, the Christian West, to say, wait a minute, we've got to have this stuff. So they translated it into Latin, and of course it changed everything. And it was Ferdinand and Isabella that take over in Spain, and they say the Jews have to leave and the Muslims have to leave also. They have two choices. They can convert, or they can, well, three choices. They can convert and leave if they don't do that, or they can be killed. So it was a bit of a bloodbath there in Spain. But ultimately it becomes once again a Christian area. So is that helpful at all to get this a little bit contexted?
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yes.
I hope so. So any one of those things, can be your doorway to say, okay, I really want to know about these, Abbasids here, or Spain. I mean, that's a whole study in itself. So dive in as you will. Then once again, the translation movement, it was a 200-year effort that sought to utilize scholars of diverse faiths and cultures to collect and translate and assimilate ancient Greek and Roman philosophical and scientific texts and Hellenistic commentaries on those texts. And of course, you see there the people. Now, what people don't understand, who say, well, Islam simply protected the writings of Galen and Euclid and Aristotle and Socrates and Plato for 800 years. And then and then Europe finally figured it out and Europe took over. Well, of course, that's not true at all. That what happened was the Islamic Empire corrected the Greeks. It added to the Greeks. It commented on the Greeks. There was a huge production of papers, books that take what the Greeks had to say, but then extend it, modify it, make it more correct. Everything from Ptolemy in terms of astronomy to philosophy. And that's what a lot of the people that we're going to take a look at here shortly were involved in, is those writings of commentary and criticism. But they also loved, what they were reading. I mean, the Greeks did tremendous work. We're in no way negating what the Greeks did. Okay, then we have just a few of the contributors to the, I'm trying to get my screen here, okay. The first one that I was very interested in terms of my own writing of my own book is the scientific method. Where did it come from? When we teach science, oftentimes we go down to Francis Bacon, maybe Roger Bacon if we're lucky. But generally we don't talk about the scientific method beginning in a formal way in Islamic Empire. Now, I used to teach my kids that in my classroom because I am a Baha'i. But most people don't have a clue that the scientific method was practiced and codified in Islam, in the Islamic Empire. That they insisted on the steps, investigation of phenomena, acquiring new knowledge, and correcting and integrating previous knowledge based on the gathering of data through observation and measurement. In other words, inductive learning, inductive processes that give new information. Whereas a lot of what the Greeks were doing was deductive. It was simply, let me think about this and I'll come up with the answer. Now, that's not to say that Aristotle didn't go out and look at nature. He certainly did and wrote about it. But the scientific method really flowered in a complete way during this time period. And people like Al-Razi, you can see the dates. I've gone from early to later, but there are many, many more. But these are just three that I chose who were the kind of the, well, Ibn al-Haytham is considered the father of the scientific method. Of course, in textbooks, you'll see that people think Francis Bacon was the father, many hundreds and hundreds of years later. But because of the movement that we've just been talking about, the translation movement and the movement into Europe with all this knowledge, Francis Bacon knew about Islamic knowledge, which is why, and of course, then you have this wonderful continuation of the knowledge. But what we don't want to see is where people don't sort of fess up to the sources that they used to get there. So Al-Razi, considered the greatest physician of the Middle Ages, father of psychology, psychotherapy, the control group, classification of chemicals, and whose medical books were used in Europe for centuries. Now, a lot of these people are what we call polymaths, meaning they studied a whole bunch of different, what we consider different sciences. Al-Haytham, the mathematician, astronomer, physicist, father of modern optics. He figured out finally, because people had it all wrong, the Greeks had it all wrong, that light came out of a beam came out of the eye and bounced off objects rather than light coming into the eye. And Al-Haytham was the one who said, no, light comes into the eye. We aren't sending out any beams through our eyeballs. Al-Biruni, considered one of the greatest scientists of all time. Mathematics, astronomy, philosopher, theologian, encyclopedist, linguist, historian, geologist. He starts geology. It's crazy. I mean, these people were just all over the place. But they were wonderful. And a lot of them were Persians. A lot of them were Central Asians. And a lot of them were Arabs. Al-Khwarizmi, Central Asia. He's the one who gives us from India, he gets what we call Arabic numerals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And he writes a book, and Europe gets the book. Ultimately, he also got the decimal system from India, improved it, improved the numerals, the whole thing. How long do you suppose it took Europe to accept it? They were offered it. It took 500 years for Europe to say, yeah, this is better than the Roman numerals. In the meantime, the Arabs have got Arabic numerals from the Indians, from the Hindu culture. And of course, they ran with it. At the same time, China comes into Central Asia and has a little skirmish, and they capture the Chinese people, and it turns out they had paper. So the Arabs said, and the Persians said, well, show us how to make it. So they did. And Samarkand in Central Asia was the place of the best paper in the world, much better than the Chinese paper. And so now they had numbers and they also had paper. So now knowledge could spread all over the empire, that they weren't stuck with parchment or sheepskin or papyrus, which wouldn't last very long. So paper is sort of like the effect of the printing press in Europe, the 14, 1500s. It exploded. It gave knowledge to Europe. But here we are much, much earlier. They offered the paper to Europe. Europe didn't want it. They said, no, we're happy with our parchment, thank you. So it took hundreds of years for Europe to get paper. There's Omar Khayyam, Persian astronomer, poet, but he was a mathematician. He produced the theory of cubic equations, ratios, heavy stuff, algebra here. Oh, and of course, Al-Khwarizmi up here, who he also gave us algebra. Again, from the Hindus, he got, and from the Greeks, who also did algebra, but he put it together and he improved it tremendously, such that he wrote a book on algebra then that becomes global. and changes the world with algebra. With algebra, now you can really do science.
Amazing.
Medicine, Ibn Sina, born in Central Asia. His canon of medicine used in Europe for centuries. Again, he was a polymath, utterly brilliant. Al-Razi, again, a Persian. And here's what Brown said about E.G. Brown, as we all know, met Baha'u'llah. He said, probably the greatest and most original of all the Muslim physicians and one of the most prolific as an author about Al-Razi. They developed hospitals, they developed drugs. Hundreds and hundreds of new drugs come into being here through chemistry. Chemistry is an Arabic word, alchemy, and then chemistry and alchemy. Ophthalmology, they go in and cure cataracts. At this time, surgical instruments are developed. It's quite something. Philosophy, all these wonderful people. Al-Kindi is called the father of Islamic philosophy, which ultimately influences scholasticism. St. Thomas Aquinas, the Christian church, in the because Aquinas read Ibn Sina, he read Averroes, he read these great philosophers, Al-Kindi, and they were all trying to figure out what's the relationship between religion and knowledge, religion and reason. And of course, it's in the writings of Aquinas that changed Christianity. But the source of it was his interest in these Islamic Persian philosophers. Astronomy, of course, is huge. 2/3 of all the named stars in the sky have Arabic names because the Arabs were tremendous observers and did all kinds of astronomical work. Al-Tusi, who was a Persian, he founded the Moraga Observatory, again, making the tables that then were given to Europe, and then the Europeans run with it, which is great. But a lot of it was the work that was already done here by these Islamic folks. Now here's a picture. The Tusi couple, it happens to be an idea of Al-Tusi, and it's found in Copernicus's book, De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, his great book of heliocentrism that changes the world and begins what many in Europe consider the beginning of the scientific revolution in Europe, 1543. But here's Tusi's drawing in the book. This is Copernicus on the left, and it's Tusi on the right. Tusi is 1261. Copernicus is 1543. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. This is great. This is scientists using other scientists, and he put it in his book as one of his sources for what he was doing. But that's the kind of thing that he didn't quite cite Islam particularly hard in his book, but we do see this in his book. So it's a start. But that's what was left out in many of the works of the Europeans, is that they didn't quite say, you know, we got 80% of this from the Islamic Empire. And here's what Arnold Toynbee said that I just love. I love Arnold Toynbee. He was a famous historian. Of course, he's gone now, but I used to read his books when I was younger. I haven't read him in a long time, but I found this quote that I really like. And he was a globalist also, and he also knew about the Baha'i faith and liked it a lot. But here's what he said. He said, what was needed was for Westerners to make a leap, recognizing that Africa's or China's past was also theirs, in the same way that they regard the histories of the extinct civilizations of Israel, Greece, and Rome as theirs. The unification of the world, Toynbee argued, meant that all histories belonged to all. And that meant the distinction between Western and non-Western was no longer tenable. Our own descendants are not going to be just Western like ourselves. They are going to be heirs of Confucius and Lao Tse, as well as Socrates, Plato, and Plotinus. Heirs of Gautama Buddha, as well as Deutero Isaiah and Jesus Christ. Heirs of Zarathustra and Muhammad, as well as Elijah. Heirs of Shankara and Ramanuja, as well as Clement and Origen. So he's saying, we're entering a new day. Things are going to change. That the world has to see history as being universal. That just as Baha'is, we consider that different manifestations are manifestations. Also, we need to see history as our history. And of course, it certainly is.
Carrie?
Yeah.
Oh, just one point. Hi.
Hey.
I have been here all along listening.
Okay.
But one thing I loved in that quote from Toynbee was the idea of this eradication between these distinctions of Western and non-Western. I think that's so important.
Yeah. Isn't it great?
Yes, the whole quote is great, but it reminds me so often, I hear very often people will say, Western religion, and make a distinction with Eastern religion. And I'm always left with the question, how are they deciding what's a Western and an East?
Right.
I don't think it's an accurate description. It's so embedded.
Ask them if the boundary they think is the Suez Canal.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Or perhaps Bosphorus.
Yeah.
Crazy.
You're crazy.
Well, this is just a short reading list. This is 2 pages, and I'll end with this, and then we can ask questions and talk some more. But the quote from Shoghi Effendi comes from Lights of Guidance. That's the first one here. So if you want to read the full text, and I hope that you do, please do go to Lights of Guidance. I think it's right here. It's on page 371 of Lights of Guidance. If you're, please be interested in what he had to say. And then out of Baha, Secrets of Divine Civilization, page 86 to 91. And Stanwood Cobb, here's Stanwood Cobb's book. Some of you may have this one. And he just ran with it. He wrote a book called Islamic Contributions to Civilization. And it's pretty well done. And then there's Philip Hitti, a very famous Orientalist, really. He History of the Arabs and Islam in the West, 37 and 62. He was one of the pioneers of trying to help the West understand what had happened in the Middle Ages. And then a simple beginning is Jim Khalili, The House of Wisdom. This is a good book, very thorough. He's an Iraqi living in England. He's a physicist, and he's also on YouTube. So if you want to really get a quick understanding of what's going on with Islamic science, the BBC did a special with him, a series of talks by him. Okay, let me go on to the next one. Yeah, George Saliba is also on YouTube right here. He's Islamic and very passionate about this whole idea. He says the name of this book is Islamic Science and the Making of the European Renaissance. And again, I Googled last night the Renaissance, and in the year 2022, I got a description of when it happened, what it was, how it happened, and who the key ideas were. It spent maybe 2 sentences on Islam. It was incredible. It was like going back to, the 1920s, where people really didn't have a clue. But I thought, oh my God. I mean, they didn't say this. They didn't say what they should have said, but they did say that there was an advanced culture, and then they ran with it. I mean, they didn't run with it. They stopped. They went back to Europe. Right now, the copyright was 2021. And that we're still getting that, you see, from people who are trying to educate us. So, of course, what that does is it makes children and adults think, oh, well, everything came from the West. Western science just kind of began because we're so damn smart. That's how it happened. Of course, it's not how it happened. And George Sarton was a Belgian who became an American professor at Harvard, and he was passionate about the Islamic Golden Age, and you probably can't get his book. He wrote this particular one in 1927, that you can probably find it in a library. But do find S. Frederick Starr, The Lost Enlightenment. This is a wonderful book that shows Central Asia that I've mentioned. So, that was on the Silk Road between China and the Middle East and ultimately Europe. But there, much of the energy and the intellect of the Islamic revolution and science came from Central Asia, because they had Buddhists coming up from India. They had Hindus coming up from India. They had the Chinese who were doing good science as well. And then, of course, the Persian influence, and then the Arab. So when they were taken over by Islam, they had already been, and of course, the foundational religion was Zoroastrianism in Central Asia. So it just this wonderful story of the commixturing of religion that flowered into just polymaths. I mean, people with minds as sharp as they could possibly be, who revolutionized mathematics and philosophy and technology. And it's all in this book, The House of Wisdom. It tells the story. But the real book is The Lost Enlightenment by Frederick Starr. And he's also on YouTube. So you can hear him actually talking about it.
So, Carrie, we only have about 10 minutes left if you want to have any time for questions.
And I'm just finished, and I'm so happy that I got through it. Okay. Now I'm going to end show. Okay.
Carrie,
now,
I was able to join you earlier, but I would like to know if China had such access to Islam, why haven't they been more forward in their philosophy and in their sciences? Why aren't they ahead of us in some areas? Because the Westerners blocked it. What about China?
Well, China had a very tough history, and China is very, very isolated in many ways. Certainly back then, you had to cross the Gobi Desert.
If I could jump in here, I'm a historian of China.
Oh, great. Great, Stephen.
Yeah, I am. My PhD is in Chinese history from Columbia University,
Oh,
and China was not backward. Actually, up until about the end of the 18th century, China was far, far ahead of Europe in almost every way. Their industry was more developed. Their science was, well, by that point, it was beginning to fall behind a little bit, but it had been ahead of Europe. The philosophy, far from being backward, was extremely fascinating and developed, but in very different ways because they had different interests. Different cultures focus on different things. But really, no, I mean, it really is. It's the 18th century that Europe finally begins to catch up with China and begins to move ahead in terms of things like economic productivity, industry, and a whole host of other things. But up to that point, China is actually far, far ahead of Europe, producing far more. For instance, steel production in China was way above anything Europe saw until the 19th century. The economy was just unbelievably active and developed for centuries. So it really wasn't, and they were, although they did not ever, Islam never took over in a large way in China. The contact was there. There was movement back and forth. For example, there happens to be we know of the earliest translation of a text of Chinese medicine into a language outside of East Asia actually occurred in the Muslim Empire. Well, it would have been actually slightly after the main empire fell. This would have been under the Ilkhans, a Mongol group. But a very famous scholar named Rashid ad-Din sponsored the translation of a text on pulse diagnosis from Chinese into Persian. So there was connection there.
Mhm.
And actually in the Muslim Materia Medica, the text on herbal medicine, many of the medicines there come from China. And likewise in China, they from around the time, once the Muslims began trading across the world like they did, the Chinese also learned a great deal of medicines from the Muslims as well. So there was a great deal of movement actually in that along the Silk Roads. So
Right.
So these civilizations that flowered, it reminds me of our civilization today. The heights we go to and the depths we fall to. And I'm not sure that we're not in the downward trend unless we learn spiritually.
Right. And this gets back to sorry. Who was going to say something? Thank you, Stephen. There's a book that I have on my shelf, and I can't remember the name of it, but it talks about Chinese science. You probably, I'm sure you know what the book is. I just can't think of it, but it was written by a Westerner about the Chinese inventions and the culture that was highly charged. But getting back to the beginning, because we have to end, we're asked to do discourse. And I'm hoping that this helps people to say, I have to get ready. I have to know this story because I have to defend Islam, as the Guardian said, and we have to emphasize the idea, which is so true, that the coming of Muhammad created a civilization that is spiritual in nature, that's rigorous, that has laws, that has discipline, that has order, that has institutions. And we are to help the world understand that it has a basis that is spiritual, and that all of the science is terrific, and all the coming together of all these different faiths is terrific. And we have to keep that going as a global enterprise. But we can't keep dissing a huge portion of history and a beautiful religion of Islam in the meantime. So we have to be bold, I think, but we certainly have to inform ourselves if we're going to change this paradigm that is strangling the West about Islam. So Islamic science is certainly a doorway of conversation and and a way to talk to people that might make them take another look and think twice about denigrating Islam, which is certainly the key thrust in many quarters. So thank you, and I hope this was okay.
It was wonderful. I just wanted to say real quickly, I shared in the which we in the chat area there, linked to on YouTube. It's a bit older now. I don't remember exactly when it came out, but it's still quite good. 3-part series called Islam Empire of Faith. The second part, which is what the link goes to, is all about Muslim science and their civilization.
Brothers and sisters, this is urgent.
So it is a really I've taught world religions occasionally. I used to use this one a lot. And so it's a great video. It's a lot of fun to watch too. I really enjoyed it. But anyway, that's another resource there. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts?
Yeah. Mehrdad, you're a scientist, a doctor, and a Persian. Would you like to say anything?
You can talk. It's not me.
Well, I'd just like to thank you. It was very informative, and it brought back also for me some old history that I learned when I was in Iran as a young person. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, we are at your pleasure, Stephen. You are the MC.
Right, and we're just about out of
Joan
time.
McGovern, thank you for your question, Joan. That was wonderful.
Well, all right, let me wrap us up then. So we do have one quick announcement here. Well, two quick announcements here before we close. So today's program has been recorded and posted to the YouTube channel entitled South DeKalb Baha'i Unity Center, where you can view it and invite others to view it as well. For members of the Baha'i Faith, you are warmly encouraged to make a financial contribution to the South DeKalb Baha'i Fund, the Sandy Springs Baha'i Fund, and the National Baha'i Fund through the online contribution system at ocs.baha'i.us, or to mail a check to the Baha'i Unity Center at 2370 Wesley Chapel Road, Decatur, Georgia, 30035. So we want to give all of our thanks to everyone who worked together to make today's program work, our wonderful speaker, our volunteer readers, Barbara Hennix, who keeps everything moving, and the spiritual assemblies of the Baha'is of South DeKalb and Sandy Springs. And a special thank you to everyone for being here and sharing your morning with us. So I'm Stephen Boynton, and until next time, stay safe and well. We're going to end now with a closing prayer for the departed. Would anyone care to read that, or shall I find one?
I can say one.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
O my God, O thou forgiver of sins, bestower of gifts, dispeller of afflictions, verily I beseech thee to forgive the sins of such as have abandoned the physical garment and have ascended to the spiritual world. O my Lord, purify them from trespasses, dispel their sorrows, and change their darkness into light. Cause them to enter the garden of happiness. Cleanse them with the most pure water, and grant them to behold thy splendors on the loftiest mount.
Thank you, everyone. Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.